For joining us this morning. This hive here in the apiary, you might remember at the end of last year, we were having a look at it, we were harvesting just a little bit of honey, and we noticed that there weren't many bees in the hive. And since then, we did an inspection and we realized that the hive was indeed queenless. And that's why the numbers are dropping. You look in these windows, it looks very thin on the ground. Normally, there's a lot of bees covering the combs when the hive is healthy and in full swing, collecting a lot of honey. So what we did about that is we introduced a new queen into this hive about 5 weeks ago. So what we're going to do today is open up the hive, do a brood inspection, see if we can find evidence that the queen is happy and healthy and laying eggs in this hive. Sometimes you put a new queen in and they don't take, and sometimes they do. So let's see if we can find out whether this hive is now queen right. Queen right is the term for when your hive is happy and healthy with a queen, as opposed to queenless. So I'll just get my smoker going. We're going to blow a few puffs in the front to calm the bees down, and then we'll go through the process of taking this hive apart. As you can see, there's not that many returning bees. I'm standing in the flight path, which is limiting them a little bit, but we've got a few coming home now. Okay, the smoker's going. I'm just going to add some smoke in at the entrance like that, and we'll leave the smoker here. So there's that waft of smoke as the returning foragers come home.
Peter, how many dead bees in front of the hive would be considered normal?
So it's pretty normal to have dead bees in front of the hive, because if you come first thing in the morning, you'll notice the undertakers taking out dead bees and dropping them as far away from the hive as they can, but sometimes they'll drop them a bit close. Here we've got some drones, so they're the male bees. You can tell because they're a bit sort of bigger teddy bear in shape, and their eyes touch together in the middle. They've got bigger eyes. Then you've got the worker bee. In comparison, you can see them here actually, the two side by side, a worker bee and a drone bee, just for the size difference. And on the eyes, it's common for people to get a bit confused early on, but you can see how the drone clearly has those big black eyes touching together in the middle. Okay, so if you use normal, if you've got a big carpet of bees, then you might have a problem. Also looking out for signs of things like chalk brood or anything that the bees might be kicking out of the hive. Okay, next, protect yourself. Standing in front of the hive like that, it's a good idea to actually have your bee veil on and protect yourself from stings. That's the point where the bees guard the most, right in front of the entrance. So if you are playing around there, put your bee veil on, protect yourself. Not like I was right then. Okay. And make sure that these are done up and you're secured there with the Velcro flap. I'm going to go without gloves, but if you're new to beekeeping, wear your gloves as well.
Peter, what size hive are you opening up today?
Great. If you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll answer them. That's Trace reading out your question. This size hive is what we call a 6 flow hive 6, and that's because it's got 6 flow frames at the back here. And that matches an 8 frame Langstroth hive. So there's 2 main sizes. There's 8 and 10. And flow frames match those with the sizes of 6 and 7, because flow frames are wider, and that's because when bees are making comb away from the nest, away from the brood nest, they like to make the cells deeper to store more honey. So that's the reason for the wider combs than in the brood nest. Okay, we'll put that aside. Smoke is still going, which is good. Any questions, put them in the comments below, and I'm going to pop that lid off. We'll put that over here, and your hive tool you're going to pry off the edge. Make sure your hive tool's nice and clean, give it a bit of a scrub up if it's not, so you're not sharing pathogens from one hive to the next. Now there's an excluder in place, so we're not looking for the queen on this, so we can just put that aside wherever we like. And here we're looking in at the flow frames, which is, we don't actually need to inspect the flow frame, so I could have left that inner cover on if we wanted to and gone straight for pulling the brood box off. So what I'm going to do is just upturn that and put it on this face in front of the hive here. So we'll do that just by levering under here and under here. At the same time I'm pulling upwards. Let's see. Got a few frames coming. Bees don't like it when that happens, so you got to lever them down like that. There we go. And we're putting this on its end, just in front here. Or it can go off to the side, doesn't really matter. But the point is to remove that box so we can look in at the brood nest and have a look how they're going. So straight away I'm seeing not a huge amount of bees, but I'm seeing a number of bees. There's bees on every frame, which is good. So they're not really low on numbers, they're just low on numbers. Any questions as we do this, pop them in the comments. So what we're going to do is a brood inspection by taking out some of these frames. Now, I hardly need it, but using a little bit of smoke where you're working will get the bees away and you're less likely to squash the bees with your tool. So firstly I'm looking for a suitable frame that's easy enough to remove from the hive. The first one is the trickiest because you've got no choice but to go straight upwards. You can probably get a little bit of sideways there. And then once you've got one out of the way, you can go sideways first, which just makes a nice amount of space for you to work your hive and not roll any bees as you lift the frames up. So here we have a very empty frame, and straight away I'm seeing the cells are of the larger size. So they're using this for either larger size for honey stores, they're about 6mm cells, or they might decide to use them for drones. And on this side is similar, so there's just a little bit of honey stored in these areas, showing they're a bit hungry, a bit thin on the ground. I'll put that frame on the shelf brackets here, which I've affixed to the side of the hive, and then I can move across to the next frame. Any questions? So for those that are tuning in, we're having a look at this hive. We introduced a queen because the hive went queenless, and now we're having a look for evidence of her. So we can either find the queen or find eggs or young larvae to show that the hive has a functioning, happy queen. Again, just a little bit of honey and otherwise quite empty here. So I'll put that one aside. It's a beautiful piece of comb though, isn't it? It's they've just naturally drawn that off the comb guide. They haven't connected it to the sides yet. It's still a relatively fresh comb that's probably been used for a brood cycle or two so far. It's beautiful. It's amazing how they can architect such an exact pattern. In the dark, in amongst 50,000 bees, they can somehow know what to do to join in with the others and continue each cell and continue the pattern. Okay, now we're moving across. Typically you find honey and pollen on the edges, and then towards the centre is where you'll find the brood. Now here, I don't know if you can see that, but there's glistening nectar down the cells. So that's good because they are bringing in something. They're bringing in a little bit of nectar in this area around here. You can see it glistening away, and they're converting that into honey using their enzymes, evaporating the water content until it gets down below 20%, and then they'll cap it off when it's ready to store. Nope, on this side again a lot of nectar, which is good to see. I'm now starting to look down the cells for any bee eggs. You should start to see bee eggs if there is a laying queen. I'll put that one aside as well. We'll move on to the next one. Okay, what have we got here? This is a darker old comb. The more times it's been used for brood, the darker the comb will get. There's a queen cup there, showing that they are getting that ready just in case they need to raise a queen. Okay, I'm going to have a look down these cells. I can see one single cell of brood, which is interesting. And a lot of pollen and young larvae, fantastic. Okay, so we know there is a queen in here. It might be hard to see in this light, but down these cells here, we're seeing young larvae. So the grub covered in royal jelly that the bees are feeding the larvae down the cells. So give us a thumbs up if you can see that. It's probably going to be pretty hard in this light unless my sister was here with the macro lens. Okay, so that's great news. So we have a queen, we have a functioning queen, we've got worker larvae. I can tell by the size of these cells that they're workers. It's 5.3-ish millimetre cell size, the smaller cell size. And when they cap it, it'll look like this cell here, which is flush with the surface. Drones will stick out a lot more. Okay, so now we've got plenty of space in the box now. I've taken 3 frames out so I can move my way through the hive. While I'm here, I could have a little quick glance around for the queen, just because it's fun to keep practicing, but there's no need to actually find her now. Okay, the camera's getting down inside the hive here, and I'm going to drop that frame over to one side and lever across the next one, gently getting any bees out of the way and slowly lifting it up. Okay, we've got a lot more brood on this one, which is good. So the queen's been functioning for some time now, and I'm seeing drones, I'm seeing workers, and I'm keeping a look out for pests and disease as well. When you've got a patchy brood pattern like this, it's straight away a red flag to have a bit of a look for sunken dark cappings with piercing in it. But one thing I've noticed is there's a white, what looks like a chalky brood down the cell. So that's the presence of a fungus called chalk brood. And weaker hives are more likely to come down with it, especially in damp conditions or damp cold conditions. So it's something to keep an eye on, because it can proliferate. It can just spread through the hive, and you get a whole lot of the larvae stage turning into what looks like a little white mummy. So the capping goes on, the silk cocoon goes on, and a couple of days later that brood dies and turns like a little lump of chalk. You'll sometimes see that dropping through to the tray area or being kicked out the front of the hive. But the best sort of remedy for chalk brood is actually a really happy, healthy hive with lots of bees in it, and they'll generally keep chalk brood at bay. Now this hive has lower numbers now, so stress seems to be the time when the chalk brood will affect the larvae. So this hive's a bit stressed because they don't have a queen. Well, they do now, but they didn't have a queen. And we're seeing a little bit of chalk brood. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes away when that new queen really starts laying, and we get a lot of bee numbers picking up in the hive. It's something to keep an eye on. Any questions?
Yeah, Cedar, lots coming in and awesome shots there, Jai. They look amazing, and you can see that little larvae in the chalk brood. That was awesome. See, Jai's asking, can a hive become queenless at any time of the year? They did a brood inspection last week and found there was little brood and couldn't find the queen. Should they be worried?
Okay, so there was little brood, you said?
Little brood, and just wondering, do hives just become queenless like any time of the year?
They can become queenless any time of the year. There's all sorts of reasons why a queen could die. Sometimes it's that you've accidentally squashed her during management, but more likely there's a few reasons. One is she could be in a process of being superseded. Here's a young bee just emerging from her cell. Have a look at this. I don't know if you can see that. Just in front of my finger there. She's just chewing her way out, about to crawl out and take her first steps in the hive. But yes, could become queenless any time, so well done for picking up that there may be an issue. So what you need to do is, if you didn't find the queen, that's okay, but look for the presence of the queen. So look down the cells for eggs or young larvae. And if you've got that, if you've got worker larvae, then you do have a laying queen and you can put the hive back together. Sometimes you've got an issue where the queen just isn't laying very well, in which case you might decide to replace the queen, and you'll need to find her to do that. You need to take her away, wait a day, and then introduce a new queen from a queen breeder. And then you'll get a more virile layer, laying lots of eggs, up to a couple of thousand a day, and that will really boom the numbers and get your hive back to being healthy. So look at that. It's, this worker bee's just really not being very considerate there. It's doing something down the cell. It's got its butt in the face of the baby trying to get out of its cell. Okay, here we go. Is it going to make it out this time? Come on. It's close. It's close. Give us a thumbs up if you can see that young worker bee emerging. It's just in front of the J of the hive tool right now, just there.
Fantastic.
Okay, it'll be cool to see it just come out. When they come out, they're a bit whiter, they're a bit more fluffy, and some of the first chores they do in the hive is cleaning cells, and look at that, oh, so close. But yeah, it's an interesting time to emerge out of the cell when you're live streaming to the world. It's probably, you know, that bee probably thinks this is what the world's about.
Might have to give it a name, Cedar. See if we can spot it next week.
Yeah, this is Bertha. You can tell because she's got 2 eyes, 6 legs. There she comes out. Come on, Bertha. Let's go. That's it.
Breakout,
That's it.
Bertha.
That breakout. Here we go. Here we go.
You can do it.
Well, there's another bee it was clinging onto. It was actually finding it helpful. Now it's got nothing to push against. There we go. Into the hive goes. Oh, still stuck with its abdomen down the cell. This is exciting stuff here, everybody, on Facebook Live. And come on, Bertha, out of the cell. One more push. Okay, here we go. And freedom. Okay.
Wow.
That's the emergence of a brand new baby bee into the hive. You can see how it's a little bit smaller, a little bit whiter. Another bee's come and communicated with it already. She's testing out her legs, and she'll be about to start work in the hive, like busy little bees do. And over the next few days, she'll probably take an orientation flight. Actually, she may stay in and do chores for a bit longer before her orientation flight. And there she goes, a new bee.
Wow.
Well done, Bertha.
Bertha the bee has been born.
That's right. Okay.
Cedar, Nikki's asking, girls are filling the flow frames in a sort of an arch pattern. Will they eventually just fill the entire, talking about the flow frame here, will they just eventually fill the flow frame?
Yeah, they generally will. As soon as the nectar flow comes on, they'll use any available space they've got in order to fill in the brood in that frame. I don't have a flow frame with me, but we can pretend with one of these. So if this was a flow frame, then what they're talking about is it's all full around here, but there's this arch here with no honey in it. I assume that's what you're talking about?
Yep, that's it, exactly.
And that typically happens when the bees get a bit hungry, and they'll eat the honey out right above the brood nest, because they need that honey in order to raise the brood, because it takes about a frame of honey and a frame of pollen to raise a frame of brood. And as you find that the nectar flow kicks in, they'll then fill that in again. There's a lot of nectar in the side of this frame here. If you have a look down these cells. Glistening nectar. It's a beautiful thing.
Beautiful. And on that same sort of question, Cedar, on the super, Andy's asking, bees have been really busy since November. They seem to be putting the honey in the super but not capping it. Is there any reason for that?
They're probably not capping it because the flow's just waned off a bit. And you'll have to be a little bit patient as they get enough honey to fill the cells and cap it off. And usually what will happen then is if they're running a bit low, they'll cap it almost indented in the flow frames, because they just don't have enough to really draw those cells out any further.
Barbara's asking, said in terms of the brood box, she's got an outer frame that the bees aren't using at all. Can she sort of move that into the middle to encourage the bees to cover it, so then she can put the super on?
That question once more?
Yeah, so got an empty frame on the outside of the brood box. Just wondering, could Barbara move that frame into the centre of the brood box so that the bees will fill it quicker, because she's keen to get her super on?
Yes, you certainly can, but it probably won't speed up anything. The thing that's slowing you down is enough nectar flow to really keep progressing the hive. When there's a presence of nectar, they'll lay more eggs and they'll collect more honey and so on. But it's a nice idea to move an empty frame on the edge, especially if you're going foundationless, in between two nice straight ones, and that'll just help them draw a nice straight frame. In the springtime it's a great thing to do, but for another reason, and that's to limit the swarming. So when your hive's booming, put empty frames towards the centre, a couple here and here, and that will relieve the primary swarm trigger, which is overcrowding, nowhere to lay any eggs. If you have a look at this frame here, you can see what I was talking about earlier with the chalk brood. So we found that one cell of chalk brood. Now in this frame you're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4 and more cells of chalk brood. So we need to keep an eye on this. So you're seeing nice young shiny larvae over here. The cappings are going on, or rather they're spinning a silk cocoon. The bees are helping cap that off, and then a couple of days later those cells are dying because of the presence of the chalk brood fungus. So as this new queen takes over, I dare say they'll right themselves, but we'll come back in here, make a note to check and make sure the chalk brood's gone away. It can really limit a hive if there's a lot of chalk brood going on. They just don't really get on their feet. They aren't strong enough to collect a lot of nectar and store honey.
And do different queens react differently to having chalk brood in the hive?
They do. So ideally you've got some nice genetics that will automatically kick out any chalk brood they find, and that's called hygienic genetics. And you can ask for a hygienic queen when buying a queen, and hygienic queens can even kick AFB out of a hive. So it's a great trait, and so for that reason beekeepers will often requeen a hive if there's a lot of chalk brood going on, and hopefully they get better luck next time with the queen being more hygienic in its genetics, and the bees will kick out that chalk brood fungus.
And Cedar, what about the questions just coming in on that chalk brood about treatment for chalk brood? Like what would you do?
So the main treatment is get your hive back to being strong. So replacing a queen, but things you might like to try before that is if your hive's in a wet, damp place in the shade, you can move it into the sun. That does help a lot. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful techniques out there. Some people get banana skins and throw it on top of the brood nest here, and that supposedly helps. Other people say no, it doesn't, so let us know if that helps for you. But apparently it's a bit of a stink bomb. There's a pheromone in banana skins that they really don't like, or a smell that smells like one of their pheromones. And it's said it's a bit like a dog coming in and doing its do on your carpet. You're probably not only going to clean up the mess, but do a whole spring clean of all your carpet just because it's terrible. So the banana skins kind of are said to behave like that, but maybe it does work, maybe it doesn't. Let us know if it works for you.
Any tips, Cedar? Michael's saying sometimes he goes to get his brood frames out and they're a bit stuck together when he's trying to do an inspection. What's the best way to sort of separate them?
Okay, we'll just come back to that because I've just spotted the queen here in front of my finger, which is neat. So if you come right in close, you can see her. She's a nice golden queen. She's just in front of my finger there. That's it. So she's cruising around. She's a bit like, hang on, what's this mammal hand doing in the way of my path? So she's wandering around in circles. She was trying to get around the other side of the frame. But you can see how her abdomen is longer. Her wings come just over halfway down her body, and she looks like a fairly young queen. She's not at full size just yet. But she's also got longer legs, and her stride is a bit different to other bees, and that's often the way I pick it up, is the movement rather than the size, because there's a lot of bees here. Her movement is different. And her back plate there is often on her thorax a bit more shiny because she's been around a lot longer. Queens can live up to 6 years and they wear all the hairs off their back plate there.
Wonder if she knows she's just had Bertha, Cedar.
She's diving around the other side. Oh no, she's back again. There we go. Can you see that, Rose?
Yeah, she is in that. She looks quite new.
We've got a new bee in our hive who's just in training for customer support. So this is Rose, everyone, just enjoying looking in at the world of the bees here. If you've got any questions, fire away. Around the other side. Where did she go? She might have just done a runner into the hive then. There she is. So you don't need to find the queen, you can just look for evidence of the queen. The only reason you would need to find her if you want to replace her, or if you're taking a split and you want to introduce a new queen, you need to know which hive the original queen is in, so you can introduce a new one into the right hive. So today the topic was queenless hive, what to do. So obviously putting a new queen in is the way to go, but if you can't find any presence of brood in your hive's probably queenless. And you'll need to introduce a new queen, ideally from a queen breeder, or you can introduce a frame from another hive, and if it's got eggs on it, then they can raise a queen from that frame. So I'd probably purchase a queen in. If you've got a queen breeder locally, you can do that from. You can often order queens in the mail, and that way it's got a bit of a jump start. You'll be at least a month ahead if you order a queen, because the queen comes mated, ready to go. I'm going to put that frame back in the hive now. Any questions?
Yeah, Cedar, back to Michael's questions, which was about if the frames were joined together. He's just having a problem getting out his brood frames for inspections. Any tips on that?
Yes. Okay, so first thing to do, if you have a look at the start of this video, is you identify a frame that is easier to get out, one that's less likely to have protrusions on it that are going to get mashed as it's pulled up. So I identified the edge one looked nice and easy to get out. I was looking down from the top and I could see it didn't look like there was going to be any trouble pulling it up. So then what I did was I managed to move it just slightly sideways to break the wax from between the frames. So that's the best thing to do first. Otherwise you might find that when you lever up on this end bar, these nails pop out. So sideways a little bit, and what you're doing, if you have a look here, is breaking the wax between the end bars. Wax and propolis they're putting between here. So let's say if this frame was stuck over here like this, then, and they're all stuck together, once you've got that first frame out, just by wiggling a little bit and slowly, gently pulling it up, then the idea is you go sideways next time, and that makes it a lot easier, breaks any of the wax and propolis that are joining the frames together, and then it's quite easy to pull up. Okay, we're going to start putting this hive back together now, because we've been through, we've had a good look, we've identified that there is indeed a laying queen in here, so we're away. So that's fantastic. We introduced a mated queen, so she's been laying for a number of weeks now, as you can see by the brood in some of these frames we've looked at. Any questions?
Yes, Cedar, a couple coming in about the queen. So if you've got a good queen and she's laying and you can see that she's laying brood, but then you see queen cups, should you eliminate them? Should it be worried, or do you just leave them?
Oh, contentious issue. Some beekeepers will get in there and be always hacking off queen cups when they need them, but perhaps they've purchased a really good queen that they really like, and it's like a stud bull, and they don't want any competition to her. They don't want another queen to come along and take reign in the hive and for the old queen to be bumped off. So also it might limit swarming too by knocking off the queen cups, because they don't have another queen, so they're unlikely to swarm then, is the theory. So some beekeepers will get in there and knock off queen cells, and others won't. So if you don't know what you're doing, you're just starting out, let the bees be, and don't go knocking off the queen cells, because they might be rearing one for a reason. Okay.
Fantastic. This is a question said I've got to ask her, of course, because it's from Melissa, and she is, you know, in my country of New Zealand, and she wants to know about wintering hives in New Zealand. So we probably know what you're going to say. Just wondering if they need more than one brood box, because would that be enough honey to get through a hive in New Zealand in the wintertime?
So in the extreme cold, here in Tasmania, which is similar to some of the south areas of New Zealand, one beekeeper will recommend that you need 2 10-frame Langstroth boxes or your hive won't survive. And another beekeeper around the corner says, no, just a configuration like this is fine. So you'll get all sorts of different opinions, but the best advice is going to come by seeking out advice from your local beekeepers as to how much honey in your locale the bees will need to survive the winter. So seek out a few opinions, of course. For every 2 beekeepers you get 3 opinions, and you'll have to make up your own mind. But the idea is that your hive has enough stores to last through. You start the next spring with a laying queen ready to go. Otherwise you can get into the situation where the bees starve out in the winter. If you find you don't have enough stores when you're leading up to winter, good idea to feed them a nice thick syrup, so they can at least store some sugar syrup they can survive on through till the next spring. I'm no expert in really cold climates. Here I am dripping with sweat, and in the winter here we get lots of honey, so we don't need to go through the pack down. If you have a look at the beekeeper.org, there's lots of experts from around the world who have great advice on cold climates as well.
Cedar, just on that note, because you were saying about the low numbers with the speed, this hive that you've opened and not much food around, would you want to feed this hive? Do you do that?
You certainly could. I almost never feed bees in my area here, just because there's flowers, generally something all year round. But if you did want to feed them, it would speed up the progress. But I was seeing the presence of nectar here, so I'm happy that they'll find enough to get on their feet and get going.
Susie's saying, Cedar, she's had the hive for a couple of months, living in Sydney. There's so many bees on the outside and so full of honey. Just so excited to get into the hive and have a look at it on the weekend. So I was just making a comment how excited she was.
Ah, fantastic, fantastic. Great, you're probably collecting some honey too. Let us know what it tastes like.
Totally. Martina's asking, if you empty the super before winter, should you leave some empty for the hive before removing it so the bees can clean off the residue honey? So you've taken all the honey out and you're wanting to remove the super. Should you just leave it there for a few days for them to have a last little snack attack?
Yes, not a bad idea. You can harvest all the honey, and if they are bunkering down for winter, they'll probably clean up the remaining honey in the hive, and then you can take off that box. If there is a little bit of nectar still in the cells, then you can just wash it and then let it dry before putting it away. Alternatively, you can just leave the nectar stores in there and put it into a freezer, and then it'll be good to go again when you put the super back onto your hive. That's the easiest method, but you do need to have enough space in your freezer and a family that is going to be okay with you taking up all the freezer room.
Move the cane toads over and stick in your flow frame.
Yes, we have this pest here called the cane toad, which knocks on the hives at night, and when the bees come out to see what's going on, they'll eat the bees. I don't know how they don't get stung in their mouth, but they love eating bees. So it's common for people to, as a way of controlling them, is to kill them by putting them in a bag and putting them in the freezer. So you will find freezers around here full of cane toads. It's a bit strange, but you know, some countries find them a delicacy, so you could always see how they are.
See, Todd's in Adelaide in the hills, just wanting a bit of advice on his hive management. He's got one brood box and it's going really well, hive's strong and happy. He's added the super, but the super's kind of being really slow. He's just very mindful of the weather at the Adelaide Hills. It's quite variable at times with winter coming up. Just wondering, would you add a second brood box?
Well, good idea to ask local beekeepers. Certainly really hot where we are, and there's a fair bit of the season left to go. So you could probably add a second honey super or second brood box if you wanted to. But local knowledge would be key there to know what's coming up and what's likely to be flowering. If there's nothing likely to be flowering, then you might just decide to keep the hive smaller.
This is Susie again coming back for another question. She's the one who was really excited about a hive, who's added the super box about a couple of weeks ago. Do you think there'll be honey this season in Sydney, or is it too late in the season to maybe start getting honey?
It's not too late. We're still in January, and you'll probably get an autumn flow. So Sydney, you might even get some honey in the winter as well if you're close to the coast. If anyone's from that locale, tune in and let us know how it is for you each year.
Eric's asking, Cedar, where in the hive is the best place? You know how you say with the flow super, if you want to get the bees going up there a bit quicker up into the flow frames, you put the wax. He's just asking, whereabouts do you put that in the flow frames?
Okay, so if you do want to speed up the process of the bees starting to use the flow frames for the first time, you can scrape up a bit of the wax from the brood frame here. Sometimes it's got a bit of honey in it too. It probably will if you're about to add a super. Then they're probably bustling with bees and starting to store honey wherever they can, including on top of the frames here. So you get your hive tool like this and simply scrape some off, and then you can just mash that into the flow frame surface. So if this was the flow frame, just mash it in like that. You won't damage the flow frame, and for your entertainment, put that frame on that edge so you can watch the bees recycle that wax and start waxing up the cells through the observation window. And that'll help speed up things a little bit, but it probably won't make much difference until you get a strong nectar flow and that aligning with a nice healthy hive, and then things happen very quickly.
Peter, do you have to put the frames back in order when you're doing a brood inspection?
You don't have to, but the main thing is to make sure you don't have areas that the bees can't service. So I'm looking at this, and I was trying to work out which frame went where, because if you can put them back in the same order, then you know that there's the correct bee space between all of the frames. But if you can't put them back in the same area, you've lost track, then just have a look and make sure this comb isn't pressing into another comb face, because if you get not enough room between the comb faces, then the bees can't service it until they chew it all the way. And there could be opportune moment for pests like the hive beetle to get in there and lay a lot of eggs, which could then turn into the start of a slime out, it's called, when you get all the hive beetle larvae sliming all through the combs. When you've got a weak colony like this, good idea to activate your beetle tray, which is in the bottom here, and catch a few of those pesky beetles. Let's just have a look and see what's going on down there. There we go, lots and lots of beetles we've caught. So we noticed this hive weak, we put some oil in it, and you can see I just threw another one in there, but lots of, all those black dots are beetles. So there's, there's probably 100 there, we can see already, of beetles that are no longer crawling around the hive, but they've drowned in the oil tray below. So that works really nicely. Good idea to activate your tray if you've got one, or any other beetle catching method if your hive is queenless or they've swarmed or weak for any reason.
See, Roz is asking, if you've got queen cups in one hive, could you shake the bees off and then use that frame in another hive as a new queen?
You certainly can use a queen cell, but a queen cup wouldn't really do much. But if it's a queen cell with a queen in it, i.e. they've drawn the cup out and the queen's going through her process of metamorphosis, it's the cocoon's complete, then that will definitely be a good start to taking a split. And beekeepers will often do that. They'll sometimes just chop out the area of comb with the queen cell on it and just push it into another comb in another hive if that hive needs a queen, or if they're taking a split. So that will give that a jump start. Or you could put the whole frame into another hive, as you said.
Peter, you were mentioning it before about taking out some brood frames. Bobby's asking, how do you cycle out honey frames to create more room for the queen to lay?
Okay. So the only cycling you'll be doing is in the brood nest down here, because the queen's not laying in your honey frames, but I'm sure what you mean is cycling out the frames with honey on the edge. So as we were talking about earlier, these frames on the edge really just have a bit of honey and not much else. You can see that honey there, the bees are a bit hungry, they're eating it, you can see by the piercings in the capping. But the way you cycle out frames is you move the older, darker ones to the edge. So we could do that now by picking a dark
Pollen bag
frame.
on that one, Peter.
Oh yeah, look at that, beautiful. Well done, Jai, behind the cameras. Notice beautiful orange pollen on the legs. That bee's has flown to numerous flowers. As she's approached, pollen grains have jumped right off the flower onto all her hairs. She's even hairy on her eyeball. She's scraped all of those pollen grains back to her back legs where her pollen baskets are, and collected, and she's flown back to the hive with probably almost her body weight in pollen and nectar stores. And there she is, ready to knock those pollen balls off, push them into cells with her head, and add her special enzymes, ferment that pollen into a good sourdough bread, and that's bee bread. The bees are onto it, and they like to eat fermented goods, which are easier to digest. Same for humans.
Right, Rose has got a question.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm just wondering, what does a propolis look like, and is it easy to harvest at any time, or is it? It has medicinal properties, right? It's a good thing to eat.
Yes. So the question is propolis. Where is it? What's it look like? Can you eat it? And the answer is yes. So it's typical to get propolis. You'll often find a lot of it around the inner covers, because the bees use propolis to glue all the hive together to seal it from the weather. So there you can see it. That brown stuff is propolis, and it's sometimes a mixture of propolis and beeswax, but it should have a pretty high content of propolis here. And what you can do is scrape it off, and you can chew on it like a piece of chewing gum, and it's got some great properties. So if you've got a sore throat or something, it can help with that, just because of its anti-bacterial and also kind of antibiotic amazing healing properties that it has, like many things in the beehive. So you scrape it like this, get rid of any bee bits there, and you can collect that up. Now you can use what's called a propolis mat. So I'm going to scrape that off for you to try after this. It looks yummy. Sometimes it looks a bit better than that, but anyway. You can use what's called a propolis mat, which is basically a piece of gauze, which then the bees will want to fill in because they don't like lots of ventilation at the top, and then you can melt that propolis out of the gauze. So that's generally the way they collect propolis. You can move that into a nice little ball of chewing gum for yourself.
Thank you.
You've got to tell us what it tastes like, Rose.
It often tastes very resiny. They'll be collecting maybe resin from pine trees or things like that, and it's got a very medicinal, resiny type of flavour.
So if you split a hive and you move the new frames to a new hive, will the bees generally go back to the original hive?
They will. So bees have got this incredible tendency to geolocate to the spot. When bees do the orientation flight, it's said that they take landmarks from around the place and they just know where home is, just like we do. And if you then move the hive even 5 metres away, they'll go, hang on, where's my hive? And they'll come back and they might just land, if we move this hive away, they'll just land on this bush and go, well, my hive's here, I know it's here somewhere. Yet the hive's 5 metres that way. So for that reason, when you're moving hives, you need to take that into account. Now, same when you're taking a split. So if we were splitting this hive, which we're not because it's too weak, then we'll be taking some of these frames out and putting it into a new box. Now, if we just put the box over here, it'll have a bit of a slow start because the returning foragers will go back to the original hive, and they'll have to wait till some of the brood in that split we've taken emerges to get enough bee numbers to really get going. Whereas if you move the parent colony over a bit and give the weaker, smaller split you've taken the lion's share of the flight path home, you'll find that that split will get going a lot quicker because foragers are returning home with stores of pollen and nectar and helping that hive get going. So usually when we take a split, we'll start off by moving this parent colony over and putting the split right in its place.
But, so this is Martin's question is, so Martin's getting a lot of honey, emptying about a couple of frames every week and getting over 3 kilos of honey out of each frame. But the last one they did was a little bit runny. So his question is, when the bees deposit the honey into the cell, is it ready or does it still contain too much water?
Okay, so well done. Sounds like you've been harvesting a lot of honey from your float hive. It's great to hear. If you've got honey that's a bit runny, and you know because honey's usually nice and thick when it cools down on the shelf, and if it's a bit liquid, then the moisture content's likely to be too high. And if it's up above, you know, that 18 or 20% range, then it's likely, depending on how many colony forming units there are in the honey, that yeasts will cause fermentation. So you'll need to either consume that, keep it in the fridge to prolong it a bit, or turn it into mead or something. So, or you can mix it in with other honey to get an average, but you probably need a refractometer to do that. You don't want to end up with a whole lot of honey that's too high in moisture content. But getting back to your question as to why, or can you have it, is it ready when the nectar's in the cells?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, the honey's not ready until you see the capping on. Let's just see if we can see it in this hive here. Okay, so when you see the capping, this is this area here, that's when the honey is ready. So to harvest this frame, you'd want the capping to be all the way across before you harvested it. If it's empty like this section here, then you might have a bunch of nectar down there which might be high in water content, and in your jar it will then ferment. So the bees are clever. They know when the moisture content's low enough, and that's when they put their capping on. And that's when, luckily for us, they store a lot more honey than they need often, and we can share some too. So you want to take the honey that's ready and capped, because that's when the bees have decided that the moisture content's low enough. In the rear window, you can often see when the honey is ready too. There's a good example on this hive box over here. I might just put it back on now, because this hive's been open a while, and it's about time we closed it up. We were happy with our laying queen. We did notice a bit of chalk brood, so we've taken a note to come back and check on that later. But the super can now go back on. There's not a whole lot of bees around the edge, so it's an opportune moment. I might just shake any bees off that. I'm going to put the excluder in place. I'm going to smoke the bees from around the edge of the super so they get off the edge, and simply going to lift up this box, get some help if you need to. Sometimes they can be heavy when full of honey, and I'm just going to line that up. But if you have a look at that rear window, getting back to your question, you can see that this frame is ready to harvest because there's a capping down the edge, and these other ones we've already harvested and they're luckily full of nectar still. If there's not much honey coming in, you can get into the situation where they've eaten some of the honey out of the middle of the frame too, so best to harvest when it's clear that the frames are filling and there's lots of nectar around.
So if you find a queen on the ground away from the hive, does it mean that the hive's pushed her out, or what's going on there?
Yeah, look, that can happen. All sorts of strange things happen in beekeeping. But it's not necessarily that they pushed her out. Perhaps you were beekeeping and she fell off the frame onto the ground. She might not necessarily make it back into the hive. So if you did find her, then put her back on the entrance so she can walk into the hive again. But yeah, strange things can happen. Like my sister the other day was inspecting her hive and the queen just flew off. You know, they're not even supposed to be able to fly when they're in egg laying mode, but bees keep breaking the rules all the time. Just got a bee up my pants actually. I'm just going to have to take my pants off for a second. Just joking. Okay. There we go.
A baby's born and Cedar's pants. It's all happening here at Flow.
Okay, so adding a little bit of smoke around. Actually, there's a nice little harvest of propolis. We were talking about that earlier. We'll get a little more for Rose's chewing gum here. And we've got time for one more question. Okay, look at that. Good amount of chewing gum there. They'll often put a lot up here on top of the frames. Here we go. You can add that to your...
I'm going to be super healthy after this. I won't get sick at all.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so the inner cover can go back on now. Checking there's no bees around the perimeter and just nestling that on. And on top of that we can put our gabled roof. There we go. Okay. Excellente. Any more questions? You got one more?
So look, here's a question. Where do the bees store the nectar when they carry it back to the hive, as you were showing those little nectar pants before?
Okay, so when a bee comes back to the hive, they would have loaded up their honey stomach with nectar, and they'll be even starting to dewater that nectar on the way home. They come back to the hive, they regurgitate that nectar to a receiver bee. That receiver bee will come and find a cell. So when there's a honey flow and your frames are just filling up, you can even witness them in this rear cross-section view of our flow frames. You'll see little droplets of nectar all around the place. And that's them starting to dry it out. And then as evening comes, they will start to consolidate that and the process will continue each day as they dry out more droplets of nectar and consolidate it into cells and go through that process of dewatering it. Thank you very much for all your great questions. Tune in again, same time next week. If you want to take a bee course to really jumpstart your learning, we have one at thebeekeeper.org, which is also a fundraiser, and we're pretty proud at the moment because we've raised enough funds to plant 1 million trees. So we're going to be doing that this year. Pretty exciting. So thank you to all those that have been a part of that course and enjoyed the learning of it. Thanks for tuning in. Same time next week. Let us know what you'd like us to cover.